Hell's Angel found his ex freezing in the snow during Christmas dinner. He exploded with rage when the steady hum of fluorescent lights filled Griffin's motorcycle shop as he bent over a classic Harley-Davidson. His large tattooed hands moved with surprising gentleness across the chrome pipes. Outside, snow fell in thick flakes, coating the world in white silence. The weather forecast had warned of a Christmas Eve storm, but Griffin didn't mind being alone in the shop. After years of chaos with the Hell's Angels, he'd learned to appreciate quiet moments like these. He wiped his hands on a red shop rag and stepped back to admire his work. The bike belonged to old Jim Parker, who needed it fixed before his grandson's visit tomorrow. Griffin smiled, remembering how different his life had been just a few years ago. Back then, Christmas meant wild parties and dangerous rides. Now, it meant helping neighbors and finding peace in honest work. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. The shop's warmth wrapped around him like a comfortable blanket. Tools hung neatly on pegboards, and the concrete floor was swept clean. Everything had its place, so different from his messy past. The small Christmas tree in the corner, decorated with motorcycle-themed ornaments, cast a soft glow across the room. Sarah, the diner owner next door, had insisted he put it up. "Everyone needs some Christmas cheer," she'd said. Griffin ran his fingers along the bike's seat, checking for any imperfections in the leather. The familiar smell of motor oil and metal filled his nostrils. This was his sanctuary now. No more violence, no more running from the law. Just him, his tools, and the satisfaction of fixing things that were broken. He glanced at the clock. 8:45 p.m. Most of the town was probably at home with their families, preparing for Christmas morning. Griffin didn't mind working late. The holidays were easier to handle when he kept busy. A gust of wind rattled the shop's windows, making the Christmas lights flicker. The storm was picking up. Griffin grabbed his thermos of coffee and took a long sip, savoring the warmth. His shoulders ached from leaning over bikes all day, but it was a good kind of tired. Might as well take a break, he muttered to himself. He needed to check if the snow was piling up too high near the shop's entrance anyway. Griffin pulled on his heavy leather jacket and wrapped a worn red scarf around his neck. The tattoos on his neck, reminders of his past life, peeked out above the fabric. He grabbed the snow shovel propped by the door, just in case. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped outside. The cold hit him like a slap to the face. Snow swirled around him, dancing in the yellow glow of the street lamps. The town looked like something out of a Christmas card, peaceful and pristine. That's when he heard it, a soft whimper, barely audible above the wind. Griffin tensed, his old instincts kicking in. He squinted through the falling snow, trying to locate the source of the sound. There, near the corner of the building, he saw something dark against the white snow. His heart stopped when he realized it was a person. Griffin moved closer, his boots crunching in the fresh powder. "Hey, you okay there?" he called out, moving faster now. The figure didn't respond. As Griffin got closer, his blood ran cold. He recognized that coat, that honey-blonde hair now dusted with snow. It was Megan, his ex-wife. She lay crumpled in the snow, her face turned away from him. Even in the dim light, he could see the bruises on her exposed skin. Her clothes were torn, and she was shivering violently. "Megan!" Griffin dropped to his knees beside her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Oh God, Megan!" He reached out with trembling hands, horrified at the state she was in. The snowflakes drifted down like tiny stars against the darkening sky outside Griffin's motorcycle shop. Inside, the warm glow of overhead lights cast shadows across the concrete floor, and the familiar scent of motor oil and metal filled the air. Griffin's large, tattooed hands moved with surprising gentleness over the chrome of an old Harley-Davidson, his movements deliberate and focused. Christmas Eve had always been quiet in this small town. That's exactly why he'd chosen it after leaving his old life behind. The peaceful silence was a far cry from the roaring engines and chaos that had once defined his existence with the Hells Angels. He paused to wipe his hands on a red shop rag, his weathered face reflected in the bike's polished surface. At 52, the years had left their mark, gray streaks in his beard, lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled. The tattoos that covered his arms told stories he'd rather forget. But they were part of who he was. The radio played soft Christmas music, barely audible above the gentle hum of the shop's heater. Griffin hummed along absently to Silent Night as he reached for a wrench. These quiet moments were when he felt most at peace, when the ghosts of his past seemed furthest away. A gust of wind rattled the shop's windows, drawing his attention to the thickening snow outside. The weather report had warned of a serious storm coming, and it looked like they'd been right. The streetlights cast an orange glow on the fresh snow, creating long shadows across the empty street. Griffin stretched his back, feeling the familiar ache in his shoulders from bending over bikes all day. The clock on the wall showed 8:45 p.m., later than he'd planned to stay. But time had a way of slipping by when he was working, losing himself in the simple, honest work of fixing things. Machines were straightforward. Unlike people, they could always be repaired if you knew what you were doing. He set down his tools and walked to the small coffee maker in the corner. The coffee would be bitter after sitting there all day, but he needed something warm before heading home. The snow was really coming down now, transforming the world outside into a white blur. "Might as well call it a night," he muttered to himself, switching off the main shop lights. The Christmas lights he'd strung up around the windows, more for the town's sake than his own, cast a soft, multicolored glow across the room. Griffin pulled on his heavy leather jacket and grabbed his keys. He could finish the Harley tomorrow. Christmas or not, he'd probably end up back here anyway. Didn't have anywhere else to be. As he opened the shop door, the bitter cold hit him like a physical force. The wind had picked up, driving the snow sideways. Griffin stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind him. He was about to lock up when he heard something, faint, almost lost in the wind. He paused, head tilted. There it was again, a sound that might have been a cry, or might have been the wind playing tricks. But years of instinct told him something wasn't right. Griffin moved toward the sound, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. As he rounded the corner of his shop, his heart nearly stopped. There, crumpled in the snow like a broken doll, lay Megan. His ex-wife's face was pale as the snow around her, her dark hair dusted with white. Even in the dim light, he could see the bruises on her face and arms, and her clothes were torn. "Megan!" He rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside her. Her skin was ice-cold to the touch, and her eyelids fluttered weakly as he gathered her into his arms. Griffin cradled Megan in his arms, her body frighteningly cold against his chest. Snow clung to her hair and clothes as he carried her through the shop door, kicking it closed behind him. The warmth of the building hit them like a wave. "Stay with me, Megan," he murmured, his voice gruff with worry. He laid her gently on the worn leather couch in his office, the same one where he sometimes caught quick naps between jobs. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, confusion clouding her features. "Griffin?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here." He grabbed the emergency blankets he kept in his supply cabinet, his hands shaking as he wrapped them around her trembling form. The bright orange material looked stark against her pale skin. Griffin cranked up the heat and grabbed his phone. His thumb hovered over the keypad for a moment before dialing 911. But first, he needed to make sure she was stable. He hurried to the small bathroom, gathering supplies, clean towels, his first aid kit, and a bottle of water. When he returned, Megan had curled into herself under the blankets, her breathing shallow but steady. "Here," he said softly, helping her sit up enough to take small sips of water. "Easy now." Her hands trembled so badly that he had to help her hold the bottle. Her face was a map of fresh bruises, blue and purple blooming across her cheekbone. Griffin's jaw clenched at the sight, but he kept his voice gentle. "I'm calling an ambulance." "No hospitals," Megan protested weakly, trying to push herself up. "Please, I just need to rest. You're frozen half to death. You need medical attention." Griffin pulled out his phone again, but Megan's hand shot out from under the blankets, grabbing his wrist. "I'm fine," she insisted, though her voice wavered. "I don't want to be any trouble." Griffin set the phone down and knelt beside the couch, careful to give her space. "You're not trouble, Megan. You never were." He opened the first aid kit and began cleaning a cut on her forehead with careful, gentle movements. Tears welled up in her eyes as he worked. "It was Derek," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We had a fight. He just left me there, in the snow." She tried to laugh, but it came out as a sob. "Said I could walk home and think about what I'd done." Griffin's hands stilled for a moment, rage building in his chest. But he pushed it down, focusing instead on applying antiseptic to her cut. "You don't have to talk about it right now." "I should go," Megan said suddenly, trying to stand. "I shouldn't have come here. I'll figure something out." Griffin gently but firmly pressed her shoulders back down. "You're not going anywhere until a doctor checks you out. That's not up for discussion." His voice was firm, but kind, the same tone he'd used years ago when they were still married, and she'd try to hide being sick. But no buts. He picked up his phone again. "You've got hypothermia, probably a concussion, and God knows what other injuries. I'm calling an ambulance and you're going to let them help you." His expression softened as he looked at her. "Please, Megan. Let me help you this time." Megan slumped back against the couch, too exhausted to argue further. Silent tears rolled down her cheeks as Griffin dialed 911, her fingers clutching the blankets tightly around herself. Griffin cradled Megan in his arms, her body frighteningly cold against his chest. Snow clung to her hair and clothes as he carried her through the shop door, kicking it closed behind him. The warmth of the building hit them like a wave. "Stay with me, Megan," he murmured, his voice gruff with worry. He laid her gently on the worn leather couch in his office, the same one where he sometimes caught quick naps between jobs. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, confusion clouding her features. "Griffin." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here." He grabbed the emergency blankets he kept in his supply cabinet, his hands shaking as he wrapped them around her trembling form. The bright orange material looked stark against her pale skin. Griffin cranked up the heat and grabbed his phone. His thumb hovered over the keypad for a moment before dialing 911. But first, he needed to make sure she was stable. He hurried to the small bathroom, gathering supplies, clean towels, his first aid kit, and a bottle of water. When he returned, Megan had curled into herself under the blankets, her breathing shallow but steady. "Here," he said softly, helping her sit up enough to take small sips of water. "Easy now." Her hands trembled so badly that he had to help her hold the bottle. Her face was a map of fresh bruises, blue and purple blooming across her cheekbone. Griffin's jaw clenched at the sight, but he kept his voice gentle. "I'm calling an ambulance." No hospitals, Megan protested weakly, trying to push herself up. Please, I just need to rest. You're frozen half to death. You need medical attention. Griffin pulled out his phone again, but Megan's hand shot out from under the blankets, grabbing his wrist. I'm fine, she insisted, though her voice wavered. I don't want to be any trouble. Griffin set the phone down and knelt beside the couch, careful to give her space. You're not trouble, Megan. You never were. He opened the first aid kit and began cleaning a cut on her forehead with careful, gentle movements. Tears welled up in her eyes as he worked. It was Derek, she whispered, her voice breaking. We had a fight. He just left me there, in the snow. She tried to laugh, but it came out as a sob. Said I could walk home and think about what I'd done. Griffin's hands stilled for a moment, rage building in his chest, but he pushed it down, focusing instead on applying antiseptic to her cut. You don't have to talk about it right now. I should go, Megan said suddenly, trying to stand. I shouldn't have come here. I'll figure something out. Griffin gently but firmly pressed her shoulders back down. You're not going anywhere until a doctor checks you out. That's not up for discussion. His voice was firm but kind, the same tone he'd used years ago when they were still married, and she'd try to hide being sick. But no buts. He picked up his phone again. You've got hypothermia, probably a concussion, and God knows what other injuries. I'm calling an ambulance and you're going to let them help you. His expression softened as he looked at her. Please, Megan. Let me help you this time. Megan slumped back against the couch, too exhausted to argue further. Silent tears rolled down her cheeks as Griffin dialed 911, her fingers clutching the blankets tightly around herself. The stairs creaked under their feet as Griffin helped Megan up to the small apartment above his shop. The doctor had cleared her to leave the hospital, but insisted she shouldn't be alone. The space was simple, a kitchen merged with a living room, a bathroom, and a bedroom tucked away in the corner. It's not much, Griffin said, flicking on the lights. The room illuminated, revealing worn but clean furniture and walls decorated with vintage motorcycle posters. But it's warm and safe. Megan hugged herself, still wearing the oversized sweater Griffin had given her at the hospital. Thank you, she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of words left unsaid. Griffin moved to the kitchen, his broad shoulders tense as he filled a kettle with water. You should get some rest. The bedroom's through there. He gestured toward the door, careful not to make eye contact. Sheets are clean. The silence between them stretched thick with memories. Their first apartment together, lazy Sunday mornings, fights that ended in slammed doors. Megan shifted uncomfortably, picking at a loose thread on the sweater's sleeve. I'll make you some tea first, Griffin said, his voice gruff but gentle. The familiar domestic gesture made Megan's eyes water. You don't have to take care of me, she protested weakly. I know. He placed a mug on the counter, the ceramic clicking against the surface. I want to. Their fingers brushed as he handed her the tea, and they both pulled back quickly, as if burned. Griffin cleared his throat and stepped away, busying himself with straightening already neat items on the counter. The bathroom's stocked, he said. Towels are under the sink. I'll be downstairs in the shop if you need anything. He paused, struggling with what to say next. Anything at all? Megan nodded, clutching the warm mug like a lifeline. Griffin, Don't. His voice was soft but firm. You don't owe me any explanations. She looked down at her tea, watching the steam rise in curling wisps. Okay. Griffin headed for the door, then stopped, his hand on the frame. Lock the door behind me, both locks. After ensuring Megan was settled, Griffin stepped out onto the shop's front porch. The night air bit at his exposed skin, but he barely noticed. His mind was racing, replaying the image of Megan's bruised face, her body shaking in the snow. Derek. The name alone made his fists clench. Griffin had seen plenty of violent men in his time with the Angels, but there was something especially twisted about someone who could hurt their own wife and leave her to freeze. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the keypad. He knew people who could make Derek regret ever laying a hand on Megan. One call was all it would take. Don't. Griffin turned to find Megan standing in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket. Her face was pale in the porch light. Go back inside, he said roughly. It's cold. I know what you're thinking. She stepped closer, her voice urgent. Please don't do anything stupid, Griffin. He's not worth it. He hurt you. The words came out as a growl. He left you to die. And he'll pay for that. Legally. Megan reached out, her hand touching his arm. I can't watch you throw your life away. Not for me. Not for him. Griffin looked down at her hand on his arm, feeling the slight tremor in her touch. The rage inside him warred with the need to protect her, not just from Derek, but from the consequences of what he wanted to do to the man. Promise me, she whispered. Promise me you won't confront him. Griffin stood in his dimly lit office at the back of the shop, staring at his phone. His hands shook slightly as he dialed the number he'd gotten from Megan's emergency contacts. Each ring echoed in his ears like a hammer strike. Well, well, Derek's voice was smooth as silk, dripping with condescension. If it isn't the ex-husband, to what do I owe this pleasure? Griffin's jaw clenched so tight it hurt. He forced himself to breathe deeply, remembering Megan's plea for him to handle things legally. You know exactly why I'm calling, Derek. I found her in the snow. You left her there to die. A soft chuckle came through the line. Is that what she told you? Poor, helpless Megan, always playing the victim. I saw the bruises. Griffin's voice dropped dangerously low. The doctor documented everything. Bruises? Oh, those. Derek's tone remained casual, as if discussing the weather. She's rather clumsy, you see, always running into things. Doors, tables, my fist. The phone creaked in Griffin's grip. His tattoo-covered knuckles turned white. You think this is funny? Actually, I do. Derek's words were sharp now, all pretense of civility gone. I think it's hilarious that my wife ran straight to her ex-husband, the washed-up biker playing hero. How touching. Griffin paced the small office, trying to contain the rage building inside him. She could have frozen to death. Please, Derek scoffed. She's survived worse. Besides, what I do with my wife is none of your business. She's not your property, Griffin growled. She's a human being. Oh, spare me the moral lecture from a former Hell's Angel. Derek's voice dripped with disdain. We both know what kind of man you really are, Griffin. The only difference between us is that I don't pretend to be something I'm not. The words hit Griffin like a physical blow, striking too close to his own doubts. But he pushed past them, focusing on why he'd called. I want you to understand something, Derek. This ends now. Derek laughed, the sound hollow and cruel. Or what? You'll beat me up? Go ahead. Prove me right about what kind of man you are. I have the best lawyers in 3 states. One wrong move, and you'll spend the rest of your life in prison. This isn't about me, Griffin said, his voice steadier now. It's about Megan. If you touch her again, you'll what? Derek cut him off. Face it, Griffin, you're powerless here. Megan belongs to me, and there's nothing you can do about it. Griffin's free hand curled into a fist. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly quiet. Listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. If you lay another hand on her, if you so much as look at her wrong, there won't be enough lawyers in the world to protect you from what happens next. The line went silent for a moment. Then, without another word, Derek hung up. Griffin slammed the phone down onto his desk, the sound echoing through the empty shop. His whole body trembled with frustrated rage. He'd wanted to reach through the phone and strangle the smug bastard to make him feel even a fraction of the pain he'd caused Megan. But Derek's words haunted him. Was he really any different? Was he just fooling himself, thinking he could be something better than what he'd been? The phone sat silent on his desk, a reminder of his own powerlessness in the face of Derek's wealth and influence. Legal channels seemed useless, but the alternatives went against everything he'd been trying to become. Griffin found Megan sitting in the small kitchen above his shop, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. The overhead light cast shadows across her face, making the dark circles under her eyes more prominent. She looked up as he entered, managing a weak smile. "I heard you on the phone," she said softly. "With Derek." Griffin pulled out a chair and sat across from her. The old wooden table between them felt like a gulf. "I'm sorry if I overstepped." Megan shook her head, her fingers tightening around the mug. "No, it's okay. Someone needed to stand up to him." She took a shaky breath. "I should have done it years ago." "How long?" Griffin asked, his voice gentle. "How long has he been hurting you?" Tears welled up in Megan's eyes. "It started small. So small I barely noticed at first. A harsh word here, a cruel comment there." She wiped at her cheeks with trembling fingers. "He'd apologize afterward, buy me expensive gifts, tell me he was just stressed about work." Griffin's hands clenched under the table, but he kept his face neutral, letting her speak. "Then came the control. He'd check my phone, question where I'd been, said it was because he loved me so much. He couldn't bear the thought of losing me." A bitter laugh escaped her. "God, I was so stupid." "You weren't stupid," Griffin said firmly. "He manipulated you. That's what men like him do." Megan nodded, tears falling freely now. "The first time he hit me, I told myself it was my fault. I'd pushed him too far, made him angry. He seemed so sorry afterward." She wrapped her arms around herself. "But it just got worse. Every time I thought about leaving, he'd remind me how worthless I was, how nobody else would want me." Griffin felt sick to his stomach. The urge to find Derek and make him pay was almost overwhelming, but he forced himself to stay seated, to listen. "Tonight," Megan's voice cracked. "Tonight was different. He wasn't even angry. He was calm, almost smiling as he—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "You don't have to tell me if you're not ready," Griffin said softly. Megan stood suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. With shaking hands, she lifted the edge of her borrowed sweater. Purple and black bruises covered her ribs, some fresh, others yellowing with age. Griffin's vision went red at the edges. "He did this while laughing," she whispered, "like it was nothing, like I was nothing." Griffin rose slowly from his chair, his whole body rigid with fury. The old rage he'd worked so hard to contain over the years threatened to explode. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. "Listen to me, Megan. What he did to you." He took a deep breath. "It ends now. I promise you, he will never lay a hand on you again." "You don't know him," Megan said, lowering her sweater. "He has connections, money. I don't care what he has." Griffin moved closer, careful to maintain enough distance not to frighten her. "I won't let him hurt you anymore, even if it means risking everything I've built here." Megan looked up at him, really looked at him, maybe for the first time since he'd found her in the snow. In his eyes, she saw not just the fierce protectiveness, but also understanding, the kind that only comes from someone who's fought their own demons and won. Morning sunlight streamed through the shop's dusty windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Megan sat on an old leather couch in Griffin's office, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The bruises on her face had begun to fade to a sickly yellow, but the pain in her eyes remained sharp and clear. "I want to press charges," she said suddenly, her voice stronger than it had been in days. Griffin looked up from his desk, where he'd been sorting through paperwork. "Are you sure?" Megan nodded, straightening her shoulders. "I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of looking over my shoulder." She took a deep breath. "For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. Like maybe there's a way out." Griffin set down his papers and turned to face her fully. "It won't be easy. Derek has money, connections." "I know." Megan's fingers twisted together. "But I can't keep living like this. Even if we don't win, I need to try. I need to show him he doesn't own me anymore." Pride swelled in Griffin's chest. This was the Megan he remembered. Strong, determined, refusing to back down. "I know a good lawyer," he said. "Sarah Matthews. She specializes in cases like yours." "Can we?" Megan hesitated. "Can we see her today?" Griffin checked his watch. "Let me make a call." While Griffin spoke quietly on the phone, Megan walked to the window. Outside, the world looked different somehow. The snow that had seemed so threatening just days ago now sparkled in the morning light. A cardinal landed on a nearby branch, its red feathers bright against the white background. "Sarah can see us at 11, Griffin announced, hanging up the phone. The drive to the lawyer's office was quiet. Megan stared out the window, lost in thought. Griffin kept his eyes on the road, but he could feel the tension radiating from her. Sarah's office was warm and welcoming, with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. The lawyer herself was a small woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that immediately put Megan at ease. "Tell me everything," Sarah said, her pen poised over a legal pad. As Megan spoke, her voice grew steadier. She detailed the years of abuse, the controlling behavior, the isolation. Griffin sat quietly beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. When she described the events of Christmas Eve, her hands shook, but her voice remained firm. Sarah took detailed notes, asking careful questions. "We have enough here for both criminal charges and a restraining order," she said finally. "The physical evidence, the medical report from the hospital, it's solid." "What are our chances?" Griffin asked. "Honestly, it won't be easy. Mr. Harrison has considerable influence in this town." Sarah looked directly at Megan. "But you're doing the right thing, and I promise you I will fight for you with everything I have." They spent the next hour going over paperwork, filing preliminary reports, and starting the process for the restraining order. With each document signed, Megan sat a little straighter, held her head a little higher. Walking back to Griffin's truck, Megan paused. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Griffin nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He opened her door, then walked around to the driver's side. As he started the engine, his phone buzzed with a text. Derek's latest threat flashed across the screen. "You'll both regret this." Griffin deleted the message without showing Megan. He pulled out of the parking lot, his jaw set. The legal wheels were in motion, but something in his gut told him this was far from over. The morning routine at Griffin's shop had changed. Instead of the usual solitude filled with nothing but the clink of tools and the rumble of engines, there was now the soft padding of feet above his head and the occasional aroma of coffee drifting down from the apartment. Griffin wiped his hands on a shop rag, glancing up at the ceiling. Megan had been up there for 3 days now, slowly finding her footing again. He could hear her moving around, probably making breakfast. The sound made his heart ache in a familiar way. The bell over the shop door chimed. "Morning, boss," called Tommy, his young apprentice. "Got the parts for the Henderson bike." "Put 'em on the workbench," Griffin replied, his eyes still drawn upward. Tommy noticed his distraction. "How's she doing?" "Better." Griffin turned his attention back to the carburetor he was cleaning. "Taking it day by day." Upstairs, Megan sat at the small kitchen table, a notebook open in front of her. Lists and plans filled the pages, appointments with Sarah, job possibilities, places to live. She'd worked as an accountant before Derek. Maybe she could find something similar. The sound of motorcycles below made her pause. She walked to the window, watching Griffin guide a customer's bike into the shop. He moved with the same quiet strength she remembered, but there was something different about him now. The angry young man she'd known had been replaced by someone more thoughtful, more centered. Around noon, Griffin headed upstairs for lunch. He found Megan making sandwiches, moving around the kitchen like she belonged there. It felt right, but also dangerous, like a dream that could shatter at any moment. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, sliding a plate across the counter. "Thanks." He sat down, watching as she joined him. "Been thinking about what comes next?" Megan nodded, taking a small bite of her sandwich. "I've got some savings Derek doesn't know about. Not much, but enough to start over." She paused. "I was thinking about opening my own bookkeeping service." Pride flickered in Griffin's chest. "You always were good with numbers." "Better than you," she teased, and for a moment it felt like old times. Their eyes met across the table, and the air grew thick with unspoken words. Griffin looked away first, clearing his throat. "Tommy's almost done with that bike out front. I should get back." Megan's smile faltered slightly. "Right, of course." The afternoon passed slowly. Griffin threw himself into his work, trying not to think about how natural it felt having Megan upstairs, how easily they could fall back into old patterns. It was too soon, too complicated. At closing time, he heard the mail truck outside. Among the usual bills and advertisements was a thick envelope from Harrison and Associates, Derek's lawyers. Griffin's stomach clenched as he read the letter inside. The legal language was dense, but the message was clear. They were challenging every aspect of Megan's claims. They had evidence that she was unstable, that she had a history of making false accusations. They were even suggesting that her injuries were self-inflicted. Griffin's hands shook as he read. He knew Derek had connections, but this was beyond what he'd expected. The letter ended with a thinly veiled threat about Griffin's own past coming to light if they pursued the case. He looked up at the ceiling again, knowing Megan was up there, finally feeling safe. How was he going to tell her that their fight was only beginning? Griffin found Megan sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her untouched cup of coffee. The morning light cast long shadows across her face, highlighting the worry lines that hadn't been there years ago. Papers were scattered across the table. Police reports, medical records, and legal documents that told the story of her nightmare. "Maybe this isn't worth it," she said quietly, not looking up. "Going to court, I mean." Griffin pulled out a chair and sat down beside her. The wood creaked under his weight. "What brought this on?" "Look at all this." Megan gestured at the papers. "Derek has money, connections. He's friends with half the people in this town." Her voice cracked. "Who's going to believe me over him?" "I believe you," Griffin said firmly. "And there's proof. Medical records don't lie." Megan picked up one of the documents with trembling hands. "He'll twist everything. Make it look like I'm crazy or attention-seeking." She let out a bitter laugh. "He's already doing it. His lawyer sent me a letter yesterday." Griffin's jaw tightened. He hadn't told her about his own letter yet. "What did it say?" That they have witnesses who'll testify I'm unstable. Former colleagues, neighbors. She shook her head. People I thought were friends. They're scared of him too, Griffin said. He reached across the table, hesitated, then covered her hand with his. But we're not going to let him win. Not this time. Megan finally looked up at him, her eyes glistening. We? You're not alone in this fight anymore. Before she could respond, Griffin's phone buzzed. It was Sarah, their lawyer. Her voice was tight when he answered. Griffin, we've got a problem. Judge Matthews has been assigned to the case. Griffin's stomach dropped. Judge Matthews, Derek's golf buddy and longtime family friend. He could feel Megan watching him as he listened to Sarah explain the implications. Can we request a different judge? He asked. We can try, but it's a small town. Most of them know Derek socially. After hanging up, Griffin broke the news to Megan. She sank back in her chair, all color draining from her face. Matthews, she whispered. He was at our wedding. He's known Derek's family for decades. Sarah says we can fight it. What's the point? Megan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is exactly what I meant. The system's rigged. He's got everyone in his pocket. Griffin stood too, his height making the small kitchen feel even smaller. Then we'll find another way. Appeal to a higher court if we have to. With what money? Megan's voice rose. I've got barely enough saved to start over, let alone fight a legal battle that could drag on for months or years. I've got savings, Griffin said firmly, and the shop brings in steady money. I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm offering. Griffin stepped closer, his voice softening. Look, I know you're scared. Hell, I'm scared too. But running away or giving up, that's exactly what he wants. Megan wrapped her arms around herself, looking small and vulnerable. What if we lose? Then we lose fighting, Griffin said. But at least you'll know you stood up to him. That's worth something. A tear slid down Megan's cheek. She quickly wiped it away, squaring her shoulders. Judge Matthews, she said quietly. Of all people. Griffin nodded grimly. It's not fair, but we're not backing down. The courthouse loomed before them, its stone facade cold and imposing in the morning light. Griffin stood beside Megan at the bottom of the steps, watching her hands shake as she smoothed her navy blue blazer for the 10th time. You've got this, he said quietly. Just tell the truth. Megan nodded, but her face was pale. I didn't think I'd feel so sick. They climbed the steps together, their footsteps echoing in the crisp morning air. Inside, the marble halls amplified every sound. Whispers, footsteps, the rustle of papers. Their lawyer, Sarah, met them outside courtroom B, her expression serious but encouraging. Remember what we practiced, Sarah said, touching Megan's arm. Just stay calm and honest. The courtroom doors opened, and Griffin's chest tightened at the sight of Derek sitting at the defendant's table. He wore an expensive gray suit and a practiced expression of injured innocence. His lawyer, James Preston, stood beside him, arranging papers with methodical precision. As they took their seats, Derek's eyes met Griffin's. There was no fear there, only cold amusement. Griffin's fists clenched under the table. All rise, the bailiff called out. Judge Matthews entered, his robes settling around him as he took his seat. His eyes swept over the courtroom, lingering briefly on Derek before moving on. Sarah presented their case first, her voice steady and professional as she outlined the abuse Megan had suffered. Griffin watched the jury's faces, trying to read their reactions. Some looked sympathetic, others skeptical. Then it was Preston's turn. He rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. Your Honor, he began, his voice carrying easily through the room. My client categorically denies these outrageous allegations. We intend to show that Mrs. Winters is not only mistaken but deliberately deceptive in her claims. Preston called Megan to the stand. She walked forward, her steps careful and measured. Griffin wanted to reach out, to steady her, but all he could do was watch. "Mrs. Winters," Preston began, pacing slowly before the stand, "you claim my client abused you on December 24th. Yet there are no witnesses to this alleged incident, are there?" "No," Megan said softly. "But... and isn't it true that you've had a history of emotional instability?" "Objection," Sarah stood. "Argumentative." "Sustained," Judge Matthews said, but his tone was disinterested. Preston smiled slightly. "Let me rephrase. Mrs. Winters, did you not seek psychiatric help 3 years ago?" Megan's face flushed. "Yes, for depression. Because of what A simple yes or no will suffice." Preston cut in smoothly. "And isn't it true that you've been seen frequently with your ex-husband, Mr. Coulson, in recent weeks?" "He's been helping me." "So you admit to having an ongoing relationship with your ex-husband while still married to my client?" Griffin watched Megan's confidence crumble. Her hands gripped the stand, knuckles white. Sarah objected again, but Preston had already planted the seed of doubt. "Your Honor," Preston continued, "I have sworn statements from multiple witnesses attesting to Mrs. Winters' unstable behavior and her inappropriate relationship with Mr. Coulson." Griffin's vision blurred with rage. He could see Derek's satisfied smirk, could feel the weight of the jury's judgmental stares. Megan sat in the witness stand, looking smaller by the minute as Preston continued his calculated attack on her character. This wasn't justice. It was a well-orchestrated character assassination, and they were watching it happen in slow motion. Preston moved with the confidence of a man who held all the cards. He approached the evidence table, lifting a thick manila folder with deliberate slowness. "Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit C." He pulled out a stack of documents. "These are police reports from 3 separate incidents over the past 5 years, where Mrs. Winters displayed erratic behavior in public." Griffin's jaw clenched as he watched Preston hand copies to the jury. Megan's face had gone from pale to ashen. She sat rigid in the witness stand, her fingers twisting the tissue in her hands. "Mrs. Winters," Preston continued, "would you care to explain the incident at the Grand Hotel in 2019? Megan's voice trembled. "I was upset. Derek had—" "According to witnesses," Preston interrupted, reading from the report, "you were shouting in the lobby, throwing objects, and had to be restrained by security." He looked up, his expression a perfect mask of concern. "Is this the behavior of a stable individual?" Sarah jumped to her feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This incident occurred during a documented panic attack, which our client was receiving treatment for." "Overruled," Judge Matthews said flatly. "Continue, Mr. Preston." Griffin's hands gripped the edge of the table. He could see Derek's subtle smile, the satisfied tilt of his head. This wasn't just a legal defense. It was a calculated humiliation. Preston produced more documents: medical records, therapy notes, even private text messages. Each piece of evidence twisted Megan's story, making her seem unstable, vindictive, untrustworthy. What should have been proof of her suffering became weapons against her. "And now," Preston said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "we come to your relationship with Mr. Coulson." He held up several photographs. "These were taken over the past month. They show you entering and leaving his property at various hours." Megan's voice cracked. "He was helping me. I had nowhere else to go." "So you admit to spending nights with your ex-husband while still legally married to my client?" Sarah objected again, but the damage was done. Griffin watched the jury's faces, the doubt, the judgment, the slow erosion of sympathy. After what felt like hours of testimony, Judge Matthews called a brief recess. When they reconvened, his expression was already set. Having reviewed the evidence presented, the judge began, his tone clipped and dismissive, I find insufficient cause to proceed with these charges. The allegations against Mr. Winters appear to be largely circumstantial, and the plaintiff's credibility has been seriously questioned. Griffin felt the blood drain from his face. Beside him, Megan made a small, broken sound. Furthermore, Judge Matthews continued, I'm dismissing this case with prejudice. Mr. Winters, you're free to go. The gavel's crack echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Derek stood, straightening his expensive suit with a satisfied smile. As he passed their table, he paused briefly, his voice low enough that only they could hear. I told you no one would believe you. Griffin started to rise, fury burning in his chest, but Megan's hand caught his arm. Her fingers were ice cold. They sat there long after everyone else had filed out, the empty courtroom feeling like a tomb. When they finally left, they walked in silence through the marble halls, past the watching eyes of courthouse staff, down the stone steps where they'd started the morning with such hope. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. Griffin's wrench hit the concrete floor with a deafening clang. The sound echoed through the empty shop, mixing with the steady hum of the old heater. His hands were shaking as he paced back and forth, the court scene playing over and over in his mind. I should have known, he growled, kicking an empty oil can across the floor. That judge was in Derek's pocket the whole time. The whole thing was rigged from the start. Megan stood by the workbench, her arms wrapped around herself. The defeat in court had left her looking smaller somehow, more fragile. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. Griffin, please, you need to calm down. He spun around, his eyes blazing. Calm down? After what they did to you in there? After how they twisted everything around? His fist crashed into the metal locker, leaving a dent. I should go over there right now and what? Megan cut in sharply. Beat him up? Get yourself arrested? She moved closer, placing a gentle hand on his arm. That's exactly what he wants. He's trying to prove I'm unstable, that you're dangerous. Don't give him what he wants. Griffin's shoulders slumped, but the rage still burned in his chest. I can't just let him get away with this. I can't sit here and do nothing while he's out there, probably laughing about how he got away with everything. Violence isn't the answer, Megan said softly. It never was. That's why I left him. And why I left you all those years ago. The words hit Griffin like a physical blow. He stepped back, running a hand through his graying hair. The old guilt rose up. Memories of his own angry outbursts, the way he'd pushed her away with his inability to control his temper. I'm not that person anymore, he said, but his voice wavered with uncertainty. Then prove it, Megan replied. Show me you're different by making the right choice now. Griffin turned away, staring at the motorcycle parts scattered across his workbench. Each piece had its place, its purpose. Problems with machines were simple. They could be fixed with the right tools and knowledge. But this felt impossible. I need some time, Megan said after a long silence. Some space to think, to figure out what to do next. Griffin's head snapped up. Where will you go? My sister's place, just for a few days. She gathered her coat from the hook by the door. I can't think straight here, not with everything that's happened, and honestly... She paused, her hand on the doorknob. I'm scared of what you might do. The words hung heavy in the air between them. Griffin wanted to argue, to promise he wouldn't do anything rash, but the anger still coursing through his veins made those promises feel hollow. I'll call you when I get there, she said, and then she was gone, leaving Griffin alone in the shop that suddenly felt too big, too empty. He sank onto an old stool, his head in his hands. The urge to jump on his bike and confront Derek was still there, pulsing with each heartbeat. But Megan's words echoed in his mind. She was right. Violence would only prove Derek's point, destroy everything they'd built. There had to be another way. He just had to find it. The Harley's engine roared to life, drowning out the quiet of the winter evening. Griffin pulled on his leather gloves, zipped up his heavy jacket, and kicked the stand up. The familiar rumble beneath him was comforting, a constant friend that had been there through his darkest days. Snow had started falling again, light flakes dancing in his headlight as he pulled out onto the empty street. The cold bit at his face, but he welcomed it. Maybe it would numb more than just his skin. Main Street was deserted, Christmas decorations twinkling in shop windows. He passed the courthouse, its imposing structure dark and silent now. His hands tightened on the handlebars as anger flared again, but the bite of the winter wind helped cool it. The road out of town curved through snow-covered fields, familiar territory he'd ridden hundreds of times. Usually the rhythm of the road cleared his mind, but tonight, memories kept surfacing like rocks in a shallow stream. He remembered the day he'd met Megan, how her smile had lit up his whole world. Back then, he'd been younger, rougher around the edges, thinking his Hells Angels patch made him invincible. She'd seen through all that, somehow finding the good in him when he couldn't see it himself. The bike's tires crunched through fresh snow as he took the curve around Miller's Lake. Their first big fight had happened here, he remembered. He'd lost his temper over something stupid. Couldn't even remember what now. But he remembered the look in her eyes, the way she'd flinched when he'd punched the wall. "Just like your old man," she'd said then. Those words had haunted him for years. Griffin eased off the throttle, letting the bike idle as he pulled over at the lookout point. The lake stretched out before him, its surface a sheet of pristine white under the clouded sky. He killed the engine, and silence fell heavy around him. His father had been a mean drunk, quick with his fists, and even quicker with cruel words. Griffin had sworn he'd never be like that, but anger had a way of sneaking up on you, of making you into something you never wanted to be. The snow fell harder now, collecting on his shoulders as he stood there. How many times had he let his temper get the better of him? How many relationships had he destroyed because he couldn't control his rage? "I'm not that man anymore," he whispered into the darkness, but the words felt hollow. The ride back to town was slower, more careful. The streets were empty, everyone home with their families for Christmas Eve. Everyone except him. When he pulled up to the shop, something felt different. Wrong. The lights were off upstairs where he'd left them on for Megan. His heart picked up speed as he parked the bike and hurried inside. The shop was quiet. Too quiet. "Megan?" he called out, but only silence answered. On his workbench, a piece of paper caught his eye. His hands trembled slightly as he picked it up, recognizing Megan's neat handwriting. "Griffin, I need some time to think, to figure out who I am without someone else's anger defining me. Please don't try to find me." The paper crumpled in his fist as he sank onto the old stool. The shop suddenly felt colder, emptier than it had in years. She was gone, and this time he had no one to blame but himself. Griffin sat in his darkened shop, staring at the crumpled note in his hand. The clock on the wall ticked away the minutes, each sound echoing in the emptiness. His phone buzzed suddenly, making him jump. Megan's name lit up the screen. His heart pounded as he answered. "Megan?" "Hi, Griffin." Her voice was soft, uncertain. "I'm at Sarah's house. I think we need to talk. Could you meet me?" He stood up so quickly the stool clattered behind him. Of course. When? Now, if you're not busy. I'll be there in 10 minutes. He already had his keys in hand. Sarah's house was on the other side of town, a small yellow cottage with Christmas lights strung along the porch. Griffin parked his truck and sat for a moment, gathering his courage. The porch light flicked on before he could reach for the door handle. Megan stood in the doorway, wrapped in a thick sweater. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but clear. She looked stronger somehow, even after just a few hours apart. "Sarah's gone to her mom's," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "She said we could use the living room to talk." The house was warm and cozy, decorated for Christmas with a small tree in the corner. They sat on opposite ends of the worn floral couch, the space between them feeling like miles. "I'm sorry I left like that," Megan started, twisting her hands in her lap. "I needed to clear my head." Griffin nodded, his throat tight. "I understand. I took a ride myself, did some thinking." "About what?" He looked down at his rough hands, scarred from years of working on bikes. "About how I'm not so different from Derek. The anger, the violence." "Stop!" Megan's voice was firm. "You are nothing like him." "Aren't I? I wanted to hurt him, Megan. I still do." She shifted closer on the couch. "The difference is that you don't act on it. You've changed, Griffin. I've seen it." "Have I changed enough?" The question that had been haunting him finally spilled out. Megan reached across the space between them and took his hand. Her touch was warm, gentle. "You're not the same man I married all those years ago. And I'm not the same woman. We've both grown." "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice rough. "Scared of failing you again. Scared of letting my anger win." "I'm scared too." She squeezed his hand. "Everything in my life feels uncertain right now. But do you know what scares me more?" She waited until he met her eyes. "The thought of walking away from this. From us." Griffin's heart skipped a beat. "Us?" "I don't want to let go, Griffin. Whatever happens with Derek, whatever comes next, I want to face it together." Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled. "I want to rebuild my life, and I want you beside me while I do it." He looked at their joined hands, his large and weathered, hers small but strong. "Even with all our history?" "Maybe because of it," she said softly. "We know each other's worst parts now, and we're still here." Griffin sat at his desk early the next morning, spreading out the papers in front of him. Photos of Megan's injuries, medical reports, and witness statements from neighbors who'd seen Derek's abuse formed a damning collection of evidence. His hands were steady as he organized everything into a folder. No trembling with rage, no desperate urge to throw punches. The morning sun filtered through the shop's dusty windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. The familiar smell of oil and metal surrounded him as he picked up his phone and dialed the number for the state police. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about justice. "Officer Martinez, this is Griffin Coulson. I need to report a case of domestic abuse." His voice was calm, controlled. "I know the local court dismissed it, but I have evidence that wasn't presented." He spent the next hour detailing everything to the officer, his words measured and clear. When he hung up, he felt lighter somehow. This was the right path. Not the easy one, but the right one. The bell above the shop door chimed. Griffin looked up to see Derek standing there, his expensive suit out of place among the tools and motorcycle parts. His face wore its usual smug expression. Well, playing detective now, are we?" Derek's voice dripped with contempt. He walked closer, running a manicured finger along a workbench. "You know, it's almost amusing. watching you try to be something you're not. Griffin remained seated, his posture relaxed but alert. I'm not trying to be anything, Derek. Just doing what's right. Right? Derek laughed, the sound echoing off the metal walls. You're a washed-up biker who couldn't keep his wife happy the first time around. What makes you think you can protect her now? Because this time, I'm not fighting with my fists. Griffin met Derek's gaze steadily. The state police have everything. Photos, medical records, witness statements. Your money might work here in town, but it won't help you with them. For a moment, something flickered across Derek's face. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. But it vanished quickly, replaced by his usual arrogant smile. You really think anyone will believe you over me? He spread his arms wide. I'm a respected businessman. You're just some ex-con with a motorcycle shop. The truth doesn't care about our reputations, Griffin said quietly, and neither do broken bones and bruises. Derek's smile turned cold. You know what your problem is, Griffin. You've gone soft. The old you, the one they called Hellfire, he would have handled this differently. The old me would have made things worse. Griffin stood slowly, his tall frame casting a shadow over Derek. But I'm not that man anymore. No, Derek sneered, backing toward the door. You're just pathetic now, playing by the rules, thinking you can take me down with paperwork and phone calls. He laughed again, but it sounded hollow. Good luck with that, old man. The bell chimed again as Derek left, and Griffin watched through the window as he climbed into his luxury car. Despite Derek's mocking words, Griffin noticed how quickly he'd retreated, how his hands had shaken slightly as he opened his car door. Griffin looked down at the folder on his desk. For the first time in years, he felt truly strong, not because of his ability to intimidate or hurt, but because he was finally fighting the right way. Megan sat at Griffin's kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her. Scattered around were stacks of papers, bank statements, medical bills, and photos that made her stomach turn. But this time, looking at them didn't make her feel weak. It made her stronger. I can't believe I kept all of this, she said, holding up a thick manila envelope. Inside were years of documentation. Every hospital visit, every police report she'd filed, but later withdrawn out of fear. I always told myself it was just in case, but I never thought I'd actually use it. Griffin leaned against the counter, coffee mug in hand. His eyes softened as he watched her work. You're braver than you know, Megan. She managed a small smile, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I don't feel brave. I feel... She paused, searching for the right word. I feel angry. All these years I let him convince me I was worthless, that no one would believe me. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, warming her face. She'd been working since dawn, organizing everything chronologically. Each piece of evidence told part of her story, a story she was finally ready to tell. Look at this, she said, turning her laptop toward Griffin. I found 3 of our old neighbors who are willing to testify. They saw things, heard things. They're not afraid of him anymore. Griffin set his mug down and moved closer, reading over her shoulder. This is good, Megan. Really good. The state police will want all of this. She nodded, clicking through more files. I've been keeping a digital record too. Emails, text messages, voicemails. Her fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, bringing up message after message. He was always so careful in public, but in private. She swallowed hard. Well, he wasn't as smart as he thought he was. Griffin's hand rested gently on her shoulder. You don't have to do this alone anymore. I know. She reached up, squeezing his hand. That's what makes it different this time, I'm not alone. They worked through the morning, building their case piece by piece. Megan's determination grew stronger with each document they reviewed, each photo they added to their file. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every woman who'd ever felt trapped, every person who'd been told their voice didn't matter. By early afternoon, they had everything organized. 3 thick folders sat on the table, containing what Megan called their ammunition. It wasn't just evidence of physical abuse. It was proof of financial control, emotional manipulation, and years of systematic intimidation. "Ready?" Griffin asked, gathering the folders. Megan stood, smoothing her shirt with steady hands. "Yes," she said, and meant it. "I'm ready to tell my story." They walked to Griffin's truck together, the folders tucked safely between them. The drive to the police station would take 20 minutes. 20 minutes that would change everything. Megan watched the familiar streets pass by, feeling different somehow. Stronger, more certain. As they pulled into the police station parking lot, Megan took a deep breath. "This time will be different," she said, clutching the folders to her chest. "This time we're doing it right." Griffin nodded, his expression determined. "Together," he said, opening her door. They walked side by side toward the station entrance, their steps perfectly matched. Through the glass doors, Megan could see officers moving about their day, unaware that they were about to receive evidence that would shake their small town to its core. The courthouse steps felt different this time. Megan walked up them with her head held high, Griffin at her side, and their new attorney, Sarah Chen, leading the way. The morning sun cast long shadows across the granite steps, but Megan didn't feel any darkness today. "Remember," Sarah said, adjusting her briefcase strap, "we have solid evidence. The testimonies from your neighbors are strong, and those text messages speak volumes." Her sharp eyes scanned the entrance. "Derek's money can't buy his way out of this one." Griffin watched Megan closely. She wore a simple blue dress that made her look both professional and determined. Gone was the trembling woman who'd once shrunk from Derek's presence. In her place stood someone ready to fight. "You okay?" he asked softly. Megan nodded, clutching her folder of evidence. "Better than okay. I'm ready." Inside the courthouse, their footsteps echoed off the marble floors. Other people milled about, lawyers in pressed suits, court officials shuffling papers, families waiting for their own cases to be heard. Sarah led them to a quiet corner to review their strategy one last time. "The judge assigned to our case has a strong record of handling domestic violence cases fairly," Sarah explained, spreading some papers on a nearby bench. "She's not easily swayed by status or money." Griffin felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. That's exactly what we needed to hear. They were going through their timeline of events when a familiar voice cut through the quiet. "Well, isn't this touching?" Derek stood a few feet away, his expensive suit a stark contrast to Griffin's modest courtroom attire. His lawyer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, hovered nearby. Megan didn't flinch. She met Derek's gaze steadily, her voice clear and controlled. "You should speak to our attorney. Derek, we have nothing to say to you." Derek's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Come on, Megan. We both know how this will end. Why drag everyone through this mess?" He glanced at Griffin. "Especially your friend here." Griffin started to step forward, but Sarah smoothly intercepted. "Mr. Thompson, any communication needs to go through me. I'm sure your attorney would agree." Derek's lawyer tugged at his client's sleeve, but Derek shrugged him off. "You really think anyone will believe you?" he asked Megan. "After everything?" "They'll believe the truth," Megan replied. Her hands were steady as she held her folder. Every photo, every medical report, Every message you sent, they tell the real story." For a moment, Derek's confident facade cracked. His eyes darted to the folder, then back to Megan's face. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice harder now. "No," Megan said. "My mistake was staying silent for so long. That ends today." Sarah stepped between them. "This conversation is over. Mr. Thompson, please direct all further communication through proper legal channels." Derek straightened his tie, trying to regain his composure. "We'll see how this plays out," he said, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. He turned and walked away, his lawyer hurrying after him. Griffin touched Megan's arm gently. "You did good." She smiled, and it was genuine. "I meant every word. I'm not afraid anymore." Sarah checked her watch. "Court starts in 20 minutes. Let's get set up inside." As they walked toward the courtroom, Megan held her head high. The folder in her hands contained years of pain, but now it would serve a greater purpose. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every person who'd ever felt trapped, powerless, or alone. Griffin watched her with pride, seeing the strength that had always been there, now shining through. The battle wasn't over, but they were ready to face it together. The courtroom hummed with tension as Megan took her place on the witness stand. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the wooden panels. Griffin sat in the front row, his hands clasped tightly together, watching as Sarah Chen approached her client. "Mrs. Thompson," Sarah began, her voice clear and professional. "Could you tell the court about the events of Christmas Eve?" Megan's hands were steady as she adjusted the microphone. "I was trying to leave the house after Derek had—" She paused, took a deep breath. "After he'd hit me during an argument about Christmas dinner. He said I'd embarrassed him in front of his business partners." She described how Derek had grabbed her arm, thrown her against the wall, and eventually pushed her out into the snow. Her voice remained strong, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I walked for miles in the cold, trying to find help. I ended up at Griffin's shop, barely conscious." Sarah methodically led Megan through each piece of evidence, the photographs of bruises, the medical reports, the threatening text messages. With each item, Derek's lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "This wasn't the first time, was it?" Sarah asked gently. "No." Megan's voice carried across the silent courtroom. "It started with small things, controlling what I wore, who I talked to. Then came the pushing, the hitting." She straightened her shoulders. "I have documentation of 17 separate incidents where I required medical attention." Griffin watched Derek's face darken as Megan spoke. The man's usual smugness was beginning to crack around the edges. When it was Derek's lawyer's turn for cross-examination, he tried to paint Megan as unstable, unreliable. "Isn't it true that you've had previous mental health issues?" "Objection, Your Honor," Sarah called out. "Relevance?" "Sustained," the judge replied firmly. After Megan stepped down, it was Derek's turn to take the stand. He strutted to the witness box like he owned it, adjusting his expensive tie with manicured fingers. "Mr. Thompson," his lawyer began, "could you describe your relationship with your wife?" "Of course." Derek's voice dripped with charm. "I've always provided for Megan. The best clothes, the finest things. She's had a wonderful life with me." He smiled at the jury, but several members frowned back. Sarah stood for cross-examination, holding up one of the medical reports. "Mr. Thompson, could you explain how your wife obtained these injuries?" "She's clumsy," he said dismissively. "Always has been." "All 17 times?" Sarah's voice was sharp. Derek's confidence wavered. "She's making things sound worse than they are." Sarah held up her phone. I have here a voice message you left for your wife on December 20th. Would you like to hear what you said to her?" Color drained from Derek's face. He glanced at his lawyer, who looked equally concerned. "If you ever try to leave me," Sarah read from the transcript, "I'll make sure you regret it. You're nothing without me. Nothing." She looked up. "Do you recognize these words, Mr. Thompson?" Derek's hands gripped the witness stand. I was angry. She wasn't listening to me." "So you admit to threatening her?" "That's not what I meant. Just like you didn't mean to leave her to freeze to death on Christmas Eve?" Derek's composure cracked further. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he looked around the courtroom, seeing the disgust on the jurors' faces. His gaze landed on Megan, who sat tall and unafraid, and for the first time, real fear flickered in his eyes. He wasn't in control anymore, and everyone could see it. The clock on the courthouse wall ticked away mercilessly. Every minute felt like an hour as Griffin sat beside Megan in the hard wooden benches. His large, calloused hand enveloped her smaller one, offering what comfort he could through touch alone. The jury had been out for 3 hours now. The waiting was the hardest part. Sarah Chen, their attorney, sat at the table in front of them, reviewing her notes with practiced calm. But Griffin could see the slight tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing at the door where the jury would emerge. Across the aisle, Derek sat with his lawyer. His usual swagger diminished. His expensive suit couldn't hide the nervous way he kept loosening his tie, the sheen of sweat on his forehead. "You okay?" Griffin whispered to Megan. She nodded, squeezing his hand. "Just want it to be over." The courtroom was nearly empty now, just the key players and a few observers. The afternoon sun slanted through the high windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Griffin could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Suddenly, the bailiff appeared at the door. "The jury is returning." Everyone scrambled to their feet. Griffin felt Megan's grip tighten as the 12 jurors filed in, their faces unreadable. The judge took his place, his robes rustling in the silence. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with steel-gray hair, stood. "We have, Your Honor." Griffin held his breath. Beside him, Megan was absolutely still. "On the count of assault in the first degree, how do you find?" "We find the defendant guilty." A small gasp escaped Megan's lips. "On the count of attempted murder." The foreman's voice was clear and strong. "Guilty." Griffin watched as Derek's shoulders sagged, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. The man who had terrorized Megan for so long suddenly looked small, defeated. The judge's voice filled the courtroom. "Mr. Thompson, please rise for sentencing." Derek stood on shaky legs, his lawyer's hand on his elbow. "Given the severity of your crimes and your complete lack of remorse throughout these proceedings," the judge continued, his tone stern, "I am sentencing you to 15 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for 10 years. The bailiffs moved forward with handcuffs. As they led Derek away, he turned one last time toward Megan, but she wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at Griffin, tears of relief streaming down her face. When the courtroom began to clear, Griffin and Megan remained seated, their hands still clasped together. The victory felt surreal, like a dream they might wake from at any moment. "It's really over," Megan whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Griffin nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He'd seen her through hell and back, watched her find her strength, her voice. Now, sitting beside her in the quiet of the nearly empty courtroom, he felt a profound sense of peace. They sat there together, letting the reality of their victory sink in. No words were needed, just the warm pressure of their joined hands and the knowledge that justice had finally been served. Sarah approached them with a gentle smile. "Ready to go?" They stood together, still holding hands, ready to face whatever came next. The evening sun painted golden streaks across Griffin's motorcycle shop, casting long shadows through the windows. The familiar scent of motor oil and leather mingled with the aroma of fresh coffee brewing in the small kitchenette. Tools hung neatly on the walls, and a few bikes waited patiently for repairs, their chrome parts gleaming in the fading light. Megan sat on the worn leather couch near Griffin's workbench, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. She looked different now, lighter somehow, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The bruises had long since faded, and there was a newfound confidence in the way she held herself. Griffin wiped his hands on a shop rag and settled into the chair across from her. "Penny for your thoughts?" She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Just thinking about everything that's happened. It feels strange, you know? Like I can finally breathe again." "Yeah, I know what you mean." Griffin's voice was gentle, understanding. He watched as she traced the rim of her coffee mug with her finger, a habit she'd had for as long as he'd known her. "Remember that first night?" she asked, looking around the shop. "When you found me in the snow?" Griffin's expression darkened briefly at the memory. "Couldn't forget it if I tried. Scared the hell out of me seeing you like that." "You saved my life that night," Megan said softly. "Not just by bringing me in from the cold, but by showing me I wasn't alone." She paused, meeting his eyes. "By helping me find my strength again." Griffin shifted in his chair, uncomfortable with the praise. "You always had the strength, Meg. You just needed to remember it was there." The shop was quiet for a moment, filled only with the soft ticking of the wall clock and the distant hum of traffic outside. A motorcycle rumbled past, the sound fading into the distance. "I've been thinking about opening my own business," Megan said suddenly. "A small bookstore, maybe. Something that's all mine." Griffin's face lit up. "Yeah? That's great, Meg. You'd be good at that." "It's scary," she admitted, "but a good kind of scary. For the first time in years, I feel like I can actually make plans for the future, dream about what I want, not just—" She trailed off, but Griffin understood. Not just survive another day. He watched as she set her coffee mug down and stood up, walking to the shop window. The setting sun caught her hair, turning it to copper and gold. She looked strong standing there, silhouetted against the light. Whole. Griffin rose from his chair and moved to stand beside her. Their reflection in the window showed two people who had weathered storms together and come out stronger. He remembered the angry young man he'd once been, full of rage and rebellion. That man would never have imagined finding peace in moments like this. "You know," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "seeing you now, watching you rebuild your life, it means everything." Megan turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I couldn't have done it without you, Griff." Griffin gently took her hand in his calloused fingers wrapping around hers with careful tenderness. "This is just the beginning, Meg. Of your new life. Of everything." She looked up at him, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. In her eyes, he saw the same hope he felt in his heart, the promise of tomorrow, of possibilities yet to unfold. They stood together in the warm light of the setting sun, ready to face whatever the future might bring. The morning light streamed through the shop windows as Griffin packed the last of his tools into a heavy wooden chest. Each wrench and socket set had its place, carefully wrapped and stored, years of memories tucked away between layers of cloth. The familiar space looked different now, emptier, but somehow full of promise. Megan descended the stairs from the apartment above, carrying a small box of books. Her footsteps echoed in the near-empty space. "I think that's the last of it," she said, setting the box down near the growing pile of their belongings. Griffin nodded, running his hand along the smooth surface of his workbench. "Hard to believe we're really doing this." "Having second thoughts?" Megan asked, a hint of worry creeping into her voice. "No," Griffin said firmly. "Just taking it all in. 20 years in this shop." He shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "But it's time for something new." The decision to leave had come naturally, like the changing of seasons. After everything that had happened with Derek, the small town felt too confining, too full of memories they'd rather leave behind. They'd found a place a few states over, a bigger town with a promising location for Megan's bookstore dreams and plenty of work for a skilled mechanic. Megan walked over to Griffin, placing her hand on his arm. "Remember what you told me? This is just the beginning." He covered her hand with his own, his touch gentle despite his calloused fingers. "Yeah, it is." They worked together, loading the moving truck, their movements synchronized after months of rebuilding trust and connection. Griffin's Harley was already secured in the back, covered carefully for the journey. Each box and piece of furniture represented a piece of their shared future. Megan's books mixed with Griffin's tools, their lives blending together like threads in a tapestry. The spring air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of new beginnings. As they loaded the last few boxes, their neighbors stopped by to say goodbye. Old Mrs. Henderson from the diner brought them sandwiches for the road. Mike from the auto parts store shook Griffin's hand and wished them well. "You two take care of each other," Mrs. Henderson said, pulling Megan into a warm hug. "And don't forget to write." "We will," Megan promised, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Griffin closed the moving truck's rear door with a solid thunk. The sound echoed with finality through the quiet street. He turned to Megan, keys in hand. "Ready?" She nodded, taking one last look at the shop. The faded sign still hung above the door. Griffin's Custom Cycles, a reminder of the life they were leaving behind. But there was no sadness in her gaze, only anticipation. They climbed into the truck's cab together, the engine rumbling to life under Griffin's touch. Megan reached across the console and took his hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. Through the windshield, the road stretched out before them, leading away from the familiar streets of their small town toward something new and unexplored. Griffin squeezed her hand gently as they pulled away from the curb. The shop grew smaller in the rearview mirror, and with each mile marker they passed, the weight of the past seemed to lift a little more. They drove in comfortable silence, the morning sun warming their faces through the windshield, ready to write the next chapter of their story together. The moving truck pulled up to a modest two-story house on Maple Street. White paint gleamed in the afternoon sun, and a wraparound porch invited quiet evenings of reflection. Griffin parked the truck and turned to Megan, who was already smiling at their new home. "What do you think?" he asked, his gruff voice softening. "It's perfect," Megan replied, her eyes taking in every detail, the flower boxes under the windows, the swing on the porch, the small garden patch waiting to be planted. They spent the next few hours unloading boxes and furniture. Griffin's strong arms made quick work of the heavy items, while Megan organized and directed traffic. By sunset, most of their belongings were inside, though boxes still lined the walls of every room. In the kitchen, in the farmhouse, Megan unpacked dishes while Griffin assembled their dining table. The familiar sounds of his work, the quiet muttering, the steady rhythm of tools against wood, filled the space with comfortable noise. She found herself humming as she wrapped their mismatched plates in paper towels to clean them. "Found the coffee maker," she announced triumphantly, pulling it from a box labeled "Kitchen, Important." Griffin looked up from his work with a grin. Now it's starting to feel like home. That evening, they sat on their new porch, mugs of coffee warming their hands. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful in a way their old town never had been. No whispers following them down the street, no sideways glances from people who knew too much about their past. The next morning, Megan walked the 3 blocks to the small storefront she'd purchased. Large windows lined the front, perfect for displaying books. The space needed work, fresh paint, new shelves, better lighting. But she could already envision what it would become. Griffin joined her during his lunch break, bringing sandwiches from the deli down the street. They sat on the floor, surrounded by paint samples and furniture catalogs. "The motorcycle shop's owner seems decent," Griffin said between bites. "Says they could use someone with my experience." Megan nodded, spreading out color swatches for the walls. "That's great. How does it feel, working for someone else?" "Different," he admitted. "But good different. Good. No pressure to keep the whole place running anymore." They worked side by side whenever they could, Griffin helping with the heavy lifting at the bookstore after his shifts at the shop. Megan chose a warm cream color for the walls, and Griffin installed built-in shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. Each evening, they returned home tired but satisfied, their dreams taking shape one day at a time. Within weeks, the bookstore began to look like Megan had imagined. She filled the shelves carefully, each book placed with purpose. Griffin built a reading nook in one corner, complete with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. The store's name, New Chapter Books, was painted in elegant gold letters on the front window. Their new routine fell into place naturally. Mornings started with shared coffee on the porch. Griffin would head to the motorcycle shop, his hands steady and sure as he worked on engines. Megan spent her days organizing inventory and creating welcoming displays in her store windows. They supported each other's independence while growing closer. When Griffin had a challenging day at the shop, Megan would listen as he talked it through. When Megan worried about her business decisions, Griffin offered quiet encouragement and practical solutions. In their new home, they found space to heal and grow, both individually and together. The shadows of their past seemed to fade with each passing day, replaced by the warm light of new possibilities. Snow fell softly outside the windows of their home on Maple Street. The twinkling lights from their modest Christmas tree cast a warm glow across the living room. Griffin sat in his favorite leather armchair, watching Megan arrange cookies on a festive plate. A far cry from last Christmas Eve, when he'd found her collapsed in the snow. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Megan said, settling onto the couch with a mug of hot chocolate. She wore a comfortable sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, looking relaxed and at peace. Griffin nodded, his weathered face softening as he looked at her. "Sometimes feels like yesterday. Other times feels like a lifetime ago." The fireplace crackled, sending dancing shadows across the walls. Their stockings hung from the mantel, simple red ones Megan had picked up from the store. She'd embroidered their names herself, the stitching a little uneven, but made with love. "The bookstore's doing better than I ever expected," Megan said, curling her feet under her. "Had 5 book clubs meeting there last week." Griffin smiled, remembering how nervous she'd been on opening day. Now her little shop was becoming a community hub, filled with readers and storytellers. "Those reading nooks I built are getting good use," he said. "They are." Megan sipped her cocoa. "How about you? Still happy working at Carter's shop?" "Yeah." Griffin ran a hand through his graying beard. It's nice just focusing on the bikes without all the headaches of ownership. Carter's a good boss. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the soft Christmas music playing from the radio. Outside, their neighbors' holiday decorations twinkled through the falling snow. Here in their new neighborhood, no one knew their past. They were just the nice couple, him at the motorcycle shop, her with the bookstore. "Remember last Christmas?" Megan asked quietly. "I was so scared, so lost." Griffin's hands tightened on his mug. "Never thought I'd find you like that. Never want to see you hurting like that again." "You saved me that night," Megan said. "Not just from the cold, but from giving up completely." "You saved yourself," Griffin corrected gently. "You found the strength to leave, to fight back. I just helped a little." Megan shook her head, smiling. "You did more than that. You showed me what real love looks like. Patient, kind, supporting without controlling." Griffin felt his throat tighten with emotion. He'd spent so many years thinking he didn't deserve peace, didn't deserve love. But here they were, building something beautiful from the ashes of their past. "Come here," he said softly, patting the space beside his chair. Megan moved to sit on the floor next to him, leaning against his leg like she used to do when they were younger. Griffin's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. The fire popped and sparked, warming their faces. Christmas lights twinkled on the tree, reflecting off the few wrapped presents beneath. They didn't need much. They had everything that mattered. "Merry Christmas, Griffin," Megan whispered. He squeezed her hand gently, his heart full of gratitude for this second chance at happiness. Together they watched the fire dance, two souls who had found their way through the darkness to a place of peace. A gentle snow drifted past their windows as Griffin stoked the fire, adding another log. The warmth spread through their cozy living room, where pictures of their life together over the past year lined the walls. Megan at her bookstore's grand opening, Griffin teaching a local kids' bike maintenance class, the two of them on a weekend trip to the coast. Megan wrapped a soft blanket around her shoulders and moved closer to the fire. "You know what I love most about our new life?" she asked, her voice carrying the contentment of someone truly at peace. Griffin settled back into his chair, his eyes soft as he looked at her. The years of anger and pain that had once creased his face had smoothed away, replaced by laugh lines around his eyes. "What's that?" "The quiet," she said, reaching for his hand. "Not just the peaceful kind of quiet, but the quiet in here." She touched her heart. "No more fear. No more wondering when the next bad thing will happen." Griffin's thumb traced circles on her palm, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "You did that," he said. "You found your strength." "We did it together," Megan corrected him. She looked around their home, the Christmas tree they'd decorated together, the bookshelf he'd built for her growing collection, the throw pillows she'd chosen to make his leather furniture more comfortable. Every piece told the story of their healing. "Remember when you used to be afraid to make decisions about simple things?" Griffin asked gently. "Now look at you, running your own business, making plans, living life on your terms." Megan smiled, thinking of her bookstore downtown. Just yesterday, she'd hosted a successful author event, something she wouldn't have dreamed of doing a year ago. "And look at you," she said. "The kids in your motorcycle maintenance class adore you. Who would have thought the former Hellfire would become everyone's favorite teacher?" Griffin chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. "Life's full of surprises." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire dance. Outside, Christmas lights twinkled through the falling snow, creating a magical scene. The peace they'd found wasn't just in their surroundings. It was in their hearts, in the way they moved through life together, supporting each other without trying to control or change one another. Megan shifted closer to Griffin's chair, resting her head against his knee. His hand automatically moved to stroke her hair, just as he'd done that first night when she'd been so broken and afraid. But now there was no fear in her touch, no hesitation in their closeness. "I love you," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of everything they'd overcome together. Griffin's hand stilled for a moment. Even now, after all this time, hearing those words filled him with wonder. He'd spent so many years believing he didn't deserve love, didn't deserve peace. But Megan had shown him otherwise, had helped him see that redemption wasn't just possible, it was real. "I love you too," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. The snow continued to fall outside their window, but inside, they were warm and safe. They'd faced their demons together, fought their battles side by side, and emerged stronger. Their love wasn't perfect. It was better than that. It was real, tested by fire and tempered by time, built on a foundation of trust and understanding that could weather any storm. As they sat together in the gentle quiet of their home, they knew they'd found something precious. Not just love, but true partnership, built on the ashes of their past and strengthened by every challenge they'd overcome together. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.